Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the sources, strip away the noise, and give you the foundational knowledge you need fast.
Today, we are deep diving into the sources surrounding a figure who didn't just participate in history. She fundamentally invented the rules of the game for an entire modern technological discipline. This is a story about how pure necessity became the mother of invention.
That's right. Our listener mission today is to unpack the life and truly extraordinary work of Margaret Hamilton. If you've been on the internet in the last few years, you have absolutely seen that iconic photo.
Oh, yeah?
Hamilton standing next to a stack of printed paper that's towering higher than she is.
It's just a mountain of code.
A mountain of code, and that's the source code for the Apollo Guidance Computer, or the AGC. But, as vast as that stack of paper is, her legacy is actually even bigger.
Much bigger. We're going to trace her journey from, believe it or not, abstract mathematician to programming these very rudimentary weather models, all the way to becoming the person who, out of frustration and foresight, coined the term software engineering.
And by the end of this deep dive, you will understand how her architectural genius, and we really mean genius, saved Apollo 11 from an aborted landing just 3 minutes before touchdown.
And not just that, but how her insistence on rigor, on process, created the very foundations for ultra-reliable software design, the kind of design that underpins every modern critical system we use today.
So the big picture here, it's about recognizing the power dynamic that existed in the 1960s. While history rightly celebrates all the incredible hardware achievements of the Apollo program,
The Saturn V rocket.
the Saturn V, the intricate lunar module, all of it, this monumental feat of human effort simply could not have happened without the groundbreaking software she and her team wrote.
You just couldn't. The hardware was the body, but her software was the brain.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Margaret Hamilton was the director of the software engineering division at the MIT Instrumentation Laboratory. Her team was responsible for developing and testing all the onboard flight software for the command and lunar modules of the Apollo spacecraft.
I mean, just stop and think about that scope. All of it.
Yeah.
For an entirely new field, it's breathtaking.
It really is. Her key accomplishments are transformative, leading the AGC team through the moon landing, saving Apollo 11 through this dynamic software architecture.
And then, successfully coining and establishing software engineering as a concept. After that, leveraging that whole experience to found two hugely successful software companies, Higher Order Software in '76 and Hamilton Technologies, Inc. in 1986.
And that contribution wasn't just celebrated in retrospect, decades later. It was recognized at the highest level. In 2016, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor in the U.S., specifically for her work leading the development of that mission-critical flight software.
So what we are looking at isn't just a historical footnote. It's the origin story of a foundational discipline that was forged under immense, almost unimaginable pressure.
She had to build the car while driving it to the moon.
That's a perfect way to put it. Let's jump into the foundations of this pioneer and see how a mathematician ended up, coding the stars.
It's always fascinating to see where these giant figures began. Margaret Elaine Heffield was born in Poway, Indiana in 1936. She started her academic journey at the University of Michigan, but then transferred to Earlham College, which is a private liberal arts school in Indiana.
And the college choice itself is interesting. She was actually following in her mother's footsteps, who had also attended Earlham. In 1958, she earned her BA in mathematics, but crucially, she also chose a minor in philosophy.
I think that combination is just. It's a key early indicator of her mindset. Mathematics gives you that rigorous logic, the formal systems. But philosophy, it pushes you to question assumptions, to understand underlying principles, and to structure abstract thought.
It's the how versus the why.
Exactly. That seems like the perfect intellectual training for someone who would later try to impose a formal, logical structure on the complete chaos of early computer programming.
That's absolutely right. And she cited some really important intellectual influences. Florence Long, who was the head of the math department at Earlham, was key in fueling her desire to pursue abstract mathematics.
Okay.
But then she credited her poet father and her headmaster grandfather for influencing her decision to include that philosophy minor. So she clearly came from a family that valued deep, structured intellectual curiosity from all sides.
Her initial plan, though, was pure academia. She was going to Brandeis.
Right. She intended to pursue graduate studies in abstract mathematics at Brandeis University. It was meant to be a life of theorems and proofs.
But life, as it does, and specifically a temporary job while her husband finished his degree, intervened. In mid-1959, she started working at MIT, specifically in the meteorology department for a man named Edward Norton Lorenz.
And this is where it all starts.
Yeah.
This is her pivot to hands-on computing.
And this early work, though it's often overlooked, was incredibly significant in its own right. She was tasked with developing software for predicting weather patterns. I mean, think about that for a second. Predicting something inherently chaotic using these brand new, clunky machines.
And when you say clunky, we mean clunky. She was programming on some of the earliest machines imaginable, the LGP30 and the PDP-1. This was at Marvin Minsky's famous project MAC, which was, one of the foundational centers of AI and computer science research.
The significance of that Lorenz connection is often missed, I think. Her software work directly contributed to Lorenz's later seminal publications on chaos theory.
The butterfly effect.
Exactly, the butterfly effect. The study of dynamic systems that are highly sensitive to initial conditions. He later actually acknowledged her contribution.
What this shows is that from the very, very beginning, her career was focused on the most complex, unpredictable, and real-time systems possible. She wasn't just doing simple data processing. She was wrestling with inherent system chaos from day one.
And we really have to emphasize the historical context here because it's so vital to understanding her later fight. This was the late 1950s, early 1960s. Computer science was not a field.
Not at all. It was a trade. There were no college majors, no structured degree paths. Programmers learned entirely on the job, gaining experience through sheer necessity, and there was absolutely no formal methodology.
That was the Wild West.
It really was.
Yeah.
The entire practice of writing code was perceived as a craft, or maybe even an art, but certainly not a rigorous scientific discipline. And this context is exactly why she would later have to invent the very discipline she was practicing.
So after her time in meteorology, she moved on to an even more high-stakes environment in 1961, the SAGE project.
SAGE, or the Semi-Automatic Ground Environment Project. This is based at the MIT Lincoln Lab. She worked there from 1961 to 1963, writing software for the prototype ANF-SQ7 computer. This was a massive computer, an extension of Project Whirlwind that had been adapted for military defense.
Right, because Project Whirlwind was initially about predicting weather, but SAGE quickly pivoted to developing anti-aircraft air defense systems for the U.S. Air Force. This demanded computation that was extremely robust, reliable, and real-time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if the software failed, planes might crash or defenses might miss an incoming threat. The stakes were already incredibly high.
And this brings us to that phenomenal anecdote, which really tells you everything about her unusual persistence and her intellectual approach to problem solving.
This is one of my favorite stories about her.
It's fantastic. So when a new programmer joined the SAGE team, they were traditionally assigned this notoriously tricky, non-functioning program, a piece of legacy code that nobody could figure out or get to run correctly.
It was essentially a test or a kind of hazing ritual to see if the new person had the mettle to deal with truly embedded, nasty complexity.
And when Hamilton was given this program, she discovered that the previous programmer had deliberately made the code unintelligible.
Yeah, this is the best part. They had written all of the embedded comments, the notes explaining what the code was supposed to do. They wrote them all in Greek and Latin.
Wait, why would you do that? Was that a common practice? To just obscure everything?
It wasn't common, but it speaks to the culture of early programming. In a field without formal standards, job security sometimes meant making yourself indispensable.
Ah, okay.
If only you could read your own esoteric code, nobody could replace you or fix your mistakes quickly. It was intentional obscurity. It was designed to protect the coder, not the code.
So she had to not only debug the logic of the code itself, but she first had to translate the context of the code using those philosophy minor skills.
Exactly. And she didn't just unravel the intentionally confusing logic. She did it with flair. She didn't just get the program to work successfully. She made it print out its answers in Latin and Greek.
No way.
Yes. She was the first person ever to get that notoriously broken piece of software functioning.
That is just incredible. It shows a level of mastery that goes so far beyond simple coding ability. She didn't just solve the technical problem, she solved the human-level puzzle of complexity and obscurity, and then she gave the joke right back.
That success on SAGE, solving the trickiest, most convoluted coding challenge they had, it made her the obvious choice for the most critical high-stakes system ever developed. It proved her unique ability to handle complex systems and uncover deeply embedded errors in systems where failure was not an option.
And that skill set was precisely what was needed when the Apollo project came calling.
Which leads us directly into the defining phase of her career, applying that knowledge to the moon mission.
In 1965, Hamilton learned about the Apollo project. She said she was immediately excited by the very exciting prospect of sending a man to the moon. She joined the MIT Instrumentation Laboratory, which was the central hub developing the Apollo guidance computer.
And she was a true trailblazer within that institution. She was the first programmer hired for the Apollo project at MIT and the first female programmer overall on the project.
You have to imagine this environment. It's a historically male-dominated field electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, aerospace engineers. And suddenly, here was this woman leading an entirely new, unproven discipline.
And she rose quickly. She became the director of the software engineering division. And again, to reiterate the scope, her team was responsible for writing and testing all onboard in-flight software for the command module and the lunar module.
Wow.
Later, they also contributed to the Skylab space station.
Yeah.
They were building the operating system, the guidance system, the navigation, the error checks, everything that actually ran the flight.
Her team was designing and developing these crucial system software components, especially in high-reliability fields. They had to invent error detection and recovery features, like how to automatically restart a system. And the famous display interface routines, which she designed herself, commonly known as the priority displays.
And all of this expertise was gained entirely through hands-on work in a field that conceptually was still fighting for respect.
Which brings us to the core conceptual contribution that shaped modern computing, coining the term software engineering.
Yeah, we hear that term every single day now. But the sources indicate that the rationale behind its creation was rooted in a genuine power struggle, a deep sense of institutional disrespect.
Precisely. Hamilton coined the term during the early Apollo missions because she realized that software development was simply not taken seriously compared to established, respected hardware disciplines like electrical or mechanical engineering.
So why wasn't it taken seriously? Was it because it was just intangible? You couldn't touch it?
Part of it was intangibility, yes. But primarily, it was the lack of rigor and formal process. Hardware engineers could show you blueprints. They could use mathematical physics to predict failure points. They had established standards and training.
Yeah.
Software, by contrast, was often seen as something you just patched and fiddled with. It was deemed soft, flexible, and secondary to the hard engineering of the physical components. And as a result, software development didn't command the same resources or receive the same level of intellectual respect.
So she needed a word, an actual technical term, to fundamentally change that perception, to elevate the work to the rigorous, mission-critical discipline it truly was.
She used the term, and I'm quoting the source here, to distinguish it from hardware and other kinds of engineering, yet treat each type of engineering as part of the overall systems engineering process.
So she's not just creating a new silo. She's integrating software into the larger system picture, insisting it deserved the same formal process structure as designing a circuit board.
This wasn't just a simple naming convention. It was an intellectual argument for professionalizing the entire craft.
A fight for legitimacy. And the resistance, it was palpable. She recounted that when she first started using the term, it was considered an ongoing joke among her colleagues. They would kid her about her radical ideas.
Just think about that. You're the lead programmer on a mission to the moon, and your colleagues are laughing at your insistence that your work requires engineering standards.
It drives home how profound a paradigm shift she was trying to force. It really highlights the institutional inertia she was fighting against.
So what was the turning point?
The turning point was critical. As she recalled, there was a memorable day when one of the most respected hardware gurus in the lab publicly agreed with her in a big meeting. He stood up and stated that the process of building software should indeed be considered an engineering discipline, just like hardware.
And that's the moment the concept broke through. Once a key hardware expert validated her premise, the entire dynamic shifted.
And now software engineering is a universally respected term. It's the basis of college curricula and the foundation of a trillion-dollar industry.
And because they were building this discipline from scratch, Hamilton and her team had to develop this incredible body of technical expertise under intense pressure. They were pioneers, defining the rules as they went, which led to a standardized set of knowledge that is still taught today.
Yeah, the source material details this comprehensive list of specialized knowledge fields derived directly from her Apollo work. It's worth exploring some of these because they really do describe the framework for modern high-reliability systems.
Okay, let's get into them.
Well, they excelled in systems design and software development, obviously, but also in enterprise and process modeling. Crucially, they developed methods for maximizing software reliability and reuse, which is fundamental to efficiency today.
So write it once and trust it forever.
Exactly. They also became experts in correctness by built-in language properties, which means using programming techniques and structures that inherently prevent certain types of errors from even being written in the first place. And open architecture techniques for robust systems.
Open architecture, so making the system modular and flexible, so that if one component fails, the entire system doesn't crash.
Precisely. It ensures robustness. They were tackling error detection and recovery, human-machine interface systems, operating systems, end-to-end testing techniques, all of this for the first time, all on a portable computer headed to the moon.
And we should remember, the Apollo guidance computer was essentially the world's first portable, high-performance computer. The sheer demand for reliability under those constraints is really what forced the invention of software engineering.
The core goal behind developing all these techniques was always focused on one thing: making code more reliable by identifying and fixing errors much earlier in the development process, a philosophy that she would later formalize in her post-NASA career.
Speaking of reliability under pressure, let's turn to the moment that absolutely cemented her legacy, the critical minutes of the Apollo 11 landing. This is the ultimate case study in software triage and reliability.
This is the historical flashpoint. It's July 20, 1969. The lunar module, the Eagle, is descending. They are only 3 minutes from the surface. The crew is focused on the landing process, and suddenly, several computer alarms are triggered.
The infamous 1201 and 1202 alarms signaling executive overflows.
Executive overflow sounds like a complete disaster, especially at 3 minutes to touchdown. In simple, practical terms, what exactly was failing?
It meant the Apollo guidance computer was being hammered with inputs and requests. It was essentially being asked to do too many things at once. The AGC was built to handle a certain workload in real time, and it was overloaded to the point where it couldn't complete all of its scheduled tasks.
So it had to start postponing things or risk crashing the entire system.
And if the AGC had just stalled or frozen, that mission would have been aborted, maybe catastrophically.
Exactly. Now, the cause of this overload is actually a point of technical dispute, which is fascinating because it highlights the complexity of system integration. The sources offer a few different perspectives.
What are the competing claims?
Claim one, the one that's often cited, is that the astronauts inadvertently left the rendezvous radar switch on. The rendezvous radar was only needed after landing to reconnect with the command module, but because it was left on, it was sending continuous, unnecessary interrupts to the computer.
So just constant, pointless noise flooding the system.
Right. However, this is disputed by Robert Wills of the National Museum of Computing, who suggests a different cause. Claim 2 is that astronaut Buzz Aldrin entered a code to request a specific display of altitude and velocity data. This was an action he performed often in simulations, but in the real-time high-stress landing sequence, it was one task too many.
So whether it was the rendezvous radar or Aldrin's request, the technical root cause is that the computer was overloaded with interrupts caused by incorrectly phased power supplied to the lander's rendezvous radar.
Right. It was a failure of the power system integrating with the computer system, creating this excessive noise that forced the AGC, which was only designed for 7 simultaneous programs, way beyond its limit.
But regardless of whether it was pilot error or hardware failure creating the noise, the computer was overwhelmed. And this is where Hamilton's foresight, designed years earlier, saved the mission.
Her team's flight software architecture was truly innovative. It utilized an asynchronous executive, meaning it could manage many tasks that weren't necessarily dependent on each other, and it employed advanced system software error detection and recovery techniques.
What kind of techniques?
These techniques included aggressive, system-wide kill and recompute from a safe place restart approach and snapshot and rollback capabilities. Think of snapshot and rollback like a modern computer system creating a temporary backup point, so if it crashes, it can instantly revert to the last stable state.
That seems necessary, but the true masterstroke, the immediate fix that allowed them to land, was her invention. The display interface routines, or priority displays. You have to explain that crucial design.
Okay, let's use a relatable analogy. Hamilton designed the software to function like a hospital emergency room's triage system. Every single process, from calculating the trajectory to running a simple display, was assigned a unique, fixed priority.
Landing guidance and engine control would be highest priority, I assume?
The absolute highest priority. Meanwhile, checking the status of the rendezvous radar was a very low priority.
So when the overload alarm went off, the triage system kicked in.
Precisely. The software was programmed to immediately recognize that it couldn't handle the full patient load. The priority displays were able to interrupt the astronauts' normal mission displays with a clear, critical alarm, that 12012002 code, and simultaneously, the computer was just dumping all lower priority tasks.
It prioritized what was absolutely essential for landing and eliminated everything else, like the unnecessary data requests or the noise from the radar. It was a life or death decision made autonomously by the software.
And here is a piece of human-machine interface genius that really speaks to Hamilton's meticulousness. She anticipated a synchronization risk.
What do you mean?
Because the computer was rapidly switching over to the new prioritized program sequence, if an astronaut hit a button too quickly after the alarm appeared, they might interact with the system before the high-priority sequence had fully synchronized.
A momentary glitch in the handoff.
Yes, and her fail-safe was brilliantly simple and human. She advised the astronauts, when you see a priority display, first count to 5.
That's it. Just count to 5.
That 5-second delay ensured proper system synchronization, even under the immense stress of a lunar landing. It was software design acknowledging human reaction time.
The result of this architecture, the priority displays presenting a clear gonna-go decision in the midst of chaos, allowed the mission control to proceed. Jack Garman, a NASA computer engineer in mission control, recognized the meaning of the error codes displayed by Hamilton's priority system. He's the one who shouted, "Go, go," and they proceeded to land successfully.
Paul Curto, who nominated Hamilton for a NASA Space Act Award years later, summarized this by stating her work was the foundation for ultra-reliable software design. It proved that software could be the most reliable component in a high-stakes system.
Hamilton herself later reflected on the incident in a 1971 letter, and her quote truly illuminates how she viewed the role of intelligent software versus just a simple calculating machine.
She wrote, "The computer, or rather the software in it, was smart enough to recognize that it was being asked to perform more tasks than it should be performing. It then sent out an alarm, which meant to the astronaut, I'm overloaded with more tasks than I should be doing at this time, and I'm going to keep only the more important tasks, i.e. the ones needed for landing."
And her conclusion goes straight to the heart of the matter. She pointed out that the computer was programmed to do more than just recognize the error. A complete set of recovery programs was incorporated into the software. The software's action in this case was to eliminate lower priority tasks and reestablish the more important ones. If the computer hadn't recognized this problem and taken recovery action, I doubt if Apollo 11 would have been the successful moon landing it was.
That is a staggering claim.
Right.
That without her software architecture, the mission would have failed. The software was not just executing instructions, it was actively making life-saving decisions and recovering from failure in real time.
So she successfully landed a man on the moon, and in the process invented software engineering as a rigorous discipline. But the crisis of Apollo 11 taught her that relying on recovery, on detection, wasn't enough. Failure needed to be, well, impossible. And that conviction drove her entrepreneurial path.
This transition is so crucial because it shows her dedication to formalizing these principles of reliability outside the confines of government work. In 1976, she co-founded a company called Higher Order Software, or HOS, with Sadie Zeldin.
And the immediate goal of HOS was to take the concepts about error prevention and fault tolerance that were developed on the fly during Apollo and formalize them into a commercial, teachable methodology. They were basically commercializing intellectual architecture.
Their key product was called USE.IT, and it was based on the HOS methodology. This product was designed to help developers build complex systems correctly from the very start.
And we see immediate adoption in high-stakes sectors. A notable application was a project to formalize and implement CIDEF, which was an automated version of a modeling language developed by the U.S. Air Force for manufacturing and defense systems.
Right, which proves that her methodologies were immediately adopted in environments where reliability was absolutely non-negotiable. HOS methodologies were also used by researchers to formalize the semantics of linguistic quantifiers and the design of reliable, real-time embedded systems. Again, systems where instantaneous failure can have cascading, terrible effects. Hamilton served as CEO of HOS until 1984.
But she didn't stop with HOS. She left in 1985, and in March 1986, she founded Hamilton Technologies, Inc., or HTI, back in Cambridge. And this company represented the culmination of her life's work. It was built around a new, even more ambitious paradigm.
HTI centered on the Universal Systems Language, or USL, and its associated automated environment, the 001 tool suite. This was meant to be the final word in system reliability, designed to mathematically eliminate errors.
USL was based on her paradigm of development before the fact for systems design and software development. This is the crucial philosophical distinction that sets her apart from almost every other programmer of her generation. Absolutely. Think about the distinction. The standard software development approach, even the one they had in early Apollo, was iterative. You write the code, you test it rigorously, you find the errors, you debug them, and you fix them. It's an error detection and correction process.
It's reactive, meaning the error had to exist before you could find it.
Exactly. Now compare that to Hamilton's vision. She recognized that no matter how good your testing is, you can never prove the absence of error, only the presence of what you found so far.
So how do you make that leap to development before the fact?
She shifted the focus from empirical testing to mathematical assurance. USL was designed to use a mathematical theory to ensure correctness and proactively keep most errors out of the system from the very beginning.
So it's the difference between building a bridge, driving trucks over it to test its stress limits, and then fixing the cracks.
Versus using structural mathematics before you pour the cement to mathematically prove that failure is impossible under expected conditions.
That's a really powerful analogy. It means USL wasn't just another programming language. It was a framework for thinking about systems that forces mathematical rigor onto every single stage of design.
She published extensively on how USL could be used to prevent the vast majority of errors in a complex system. The USL was created after her Apollo experience, where she determined that if a crisis like the 1201 alarm was even possible, then the initial design process itself was flawed.
So she moved from saving a mission from an error to making that specific type of error impossible to begin with.
That's her ultimate intellectual legacy. It is truly remarkable that the same woman who had to fight for the mere recognition of software engineering because the discipline was so chaotic was the one who then spent the rest of her career trying to build a mathematical framework to make that same discipline essentially error-proof.
That takes incredible foresight and commitment, and that profound, decades-long contribution did not go unrecognized. We should pause and look at the recognition she received later in her career, which really validated her entire professional argument.
As we mentioned, the highest civilian honor was the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2016 from Barack Obama. But the monetary value that NASA placed on her work is a powerful indicator of its essential nature.
Right, the NASA Exceptional Space Act Award she received in 2003, it included a payment of $37,200, which, at the time, was the largest amount ever awarded to any individual in NASA's history for scientific and technical contributions.
That speaks volumes about how critical they viewed her work to their foundational success. NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe specifically noted that the concepts she and her team created became the building blocks for modern software engineering.
So it wasn't just a historical thank you, it was an acknowledgement of ongoing technical debt.
She also received the Augusta Ada Lovelace Award in 1986, the Computer History Museum Fellow Award in 2017, and in 2022 she was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. These are multidisciplinary accolades that recognize her impact across engineering, computing, and aerospace.
And beyond the professional accolades, her cultural and social legacy is equally significant, particularly when it comes to representation in STEM.
Hamilton, along with other early programming pioneers like COBOL inventor Grace Hopper, is widely credited with helping to open the door for more women to enter and succeed in STEM fields, particularly software. She provided a visible, high-impact example of female leadership in a mission that literally launched humanity forward.
And the tributes are just fantastic. In 2017, she was featured in the Women of NASA Lego set. That set included a minifigure of Hamilton and a recreation of her famous 1969 photo.
That photo, standing next to the physical manifestation of her code, is such a powerful image. It visually communicates the scale of the software achievement that was necessary. A monumental physical output representing hundreds of thousands of lines of high-reliability code.
And in 2019, Google created this stunning moonlit tribute at the Ivanpah solar power facility. They configured the massive field of mirrors to create a gigantic temporary picture of Hamilton and Apollo 11 by moonlight.
Using high-tech solar energy mirrors to create a portrait large enough to be seen from the air, it's an incredible testament to her influence. And we should also mention that her career and pioneering role inspired the character Margot Madison in the alternate history series For All Mankind.
Right, showing her ongoing influence in modern fiction as a representation of female engineering leadership. To synthesize this entire journey, we can look back at the words of Robert Macmillan from Wired, who I think perfectly captured her role. Her code got humans on the moon and invented software itself.
She didn't just write code for the world's first portable computer, the AGC. She assisted in the creation of the core principles in computer programming. And her work established that software was not just an art or a craft, but a demanding, rigorous, and essential engineering discipline.
Her ultimate contribution was elevating the abstract craft of writing instructions for a machine into a formalized, reliable, systems-level process that could withstand immense pressure and save lives.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into Margaret Hamilton and the birth of software engineering. We traced her path from early studies in abstract mathematics and philosophy through her pioneering work on the SAGE Air Defense Project, where she proved she could tame intentional complexity.
Then we looked at her crucial role in stabilizing the Apollo 11 landing through that genius software architecture, specifically those priority displays that performed essential triage in real time.
And finally, her subsequent founding of higher-order software and Hamilton Technologies, which were built specifically to formalize the principles of fault tolerance, and her ultimate paradigm development before the fact.
The Apollo program, which put humans on the moon, was truly a monumental software achievement driven by Margaret Hamilton's conviction that code needed rigor, process, and respect.
But let's leave you with a final, provocative thought, building on her ultimate goal. Hamilton's USL paradigm development before the fact is about mathematical prevention rather than iterative detection. The Apollo 11 crisis showed that detection methods failed when the stakes were highest, requiring last-second recovery.
So given that Hamilton provided a methodology to pursue absolute assurance, which modern, complex, hyper-connected systems, I'm thinking global financial trading platforms, national power grids, or complex AI infrastructure driving autonomous vehicles and critical defense, which of these are currently operating at a scale that risks catastrophic failure?
These systems rely on error detection and testing, but perhaps they face equivalent life or death or economy or death stakes that only Hamilton's USL approach, demanding mathematical certainty from the design stage, can truly solve. What stands out to you as the next system that desperately requires Hamilton's development before the fact? Philosophy.
Considering the economic and safety implications of system-wide failures in our modern, hyper-connected world, the tools she invented decades ago might be the only thing that can ensure our future systems don't repeat the near disaster of Apollo 11.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.
Until next time, stay well informed.
Welcome to the debate. When we talk about the history of computing, Margaret Hamilton is just this monumental figure. She led the software team that, put humanity on the moon with the Apollo Guidance Computer, the AGC. But her legacy is sort of twofold. She delivered this life-saving technical software, and she also defined the very discipline itself.
And that's the intellectual tension we really have to wrestle with today. Hamilton wasn't just a programmer. She was a pioneer who really forced the world to take software seriously.
Exactly. So our central question is this. Does Margaret Hamilton's primary and most enduring contribution to computing lie in the, let's call it the conceptual innovation of defining software engineering and legitimizing the whole field? Or was it the technical innovation of creating ultra-reliable software design and those specific error recovery techniques that were proven during the Apollo 11 landing?
And I'll be arguing that the tangible technical solution, the actual system design that saved the mission, is the enduring foundation. That's what all modern reliability is built on. It's the mechanism, not the mandate.
And I'll maintain the opposite. I think the foundational contribution was giving the discipline a name, and crucially, the professional status it needed. That conceptual shift was the essential prerequisite for even demanding the level of technical rigor we saw in the AGC. So to understand why the term software engineering matters so much, you really have to look back at the early 1960s. Software development was, frankly, it was viewed as an afterthought. It was often unstructured, developed ad hoc, and, regarded by many as just a clever craft, not really comparable to established disciplines like civil or electrical engineering. Programmers were pretty much learning on the job. Hamilton recognized that if software was going to run these critical, multi-billion-dollar missions, it had to be afforded the same level of respect, the same rigor, and the same standardization as hardware development. She coined the term software engineering specifically to, and I'm quoting here, distinguish it from hardware and other kinds of engineering, yet treat each type of engineering as part of the overall systems engineering process.
Right.
This was a massive act of professional advocacy. By claiming the term engineering, she imposed expectations of formal methodology, of accountability, of predictability onto what was a pretty chaotic field. Hamilton recalled a memorable day when a prominent hardware expert finally accepted that building software should be an engineering discipline. That acceptance, that conceptual shift, meant software could move past shortcuts and begin developing the robust, predictable solutions needed for the AGC. Legitimacy, really. It opened the door to technical excellence.
That's a compelling argument for the cultural impact of the term, but I would argue that the successful implementation of her technical methods is what ultimately created that legitimacy, and it forced the world to recognize the field. I mean, you can name something whatever you want, but if it fails under pressure, the name means absolutely nothing.
Okay.
My position rests on that concrete life or death scenario. The survival of Apollo 11. 3 minutes before the lunar touchdown, the AGC was just bombarded by several critical alarms. This was an executive overflow.
And could you just clarify that technical term for listeners who might not be familiar with the AGC architecture?
Of course. An executive overflow, it's essentially the computer saying it's overloaded. It was being asked to perform way too many tasks at once, specifically because the rendezvous radar switch had been left in the wrong position. This flooded the processor with low-priority interrupts. Any less robust system would have just crashed, requiring an immediate mission abort. But Hamilton's onboard flight software saved the day. Created error detection and recovery logic, specifically what were called the priority displays. These systems interrupted the normal view, warned the astronauts with the 1201 and 1202 alarms, and crucially, the software was designed to eliminate or kill and recompute lower priority background tasks. This freed up resources to focus solely on the critical landing tasks. This demonstrated in the most spectacular fashion that software could be ultra-reliable. Paul Curto actually called her work the foundation for ultra-reliable software design. The technical design is the system that saved human lives. The conceptual term is just an abstraction of that reality.
Let's delve deeper into the Apollo 11 crisis, because that incident is the ultimate proof of technical genius. It wasn't just luck, it was architecture. I agree, the incident proved this software's functionality, but let's look at the source of that functionality. I mean, why did they design a system with such sophisticated error handling in the first place?
Well, because of the technical constraints of the mission. They had extremely limited memory and processing power, yet they had to manage thousands of inputs and outputs in real time. This forced technical innovation. Her solution involved an asynchronous executive design that gave every single task a unique priority. When the overflow happened, the computer didn't panic. It followed a meticulously engineered hierarchy, shedding non-essential tasks like background housekeeping, and preserving the core landing processes. This assignment of a unique priority to every process, ensuring events would take place in the correct order, that is the concrete, technical achievement that became the basis for modern operating system process management.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it sort of implies the technical achievement existed in a vacuum. It separates the mechanism from the philosophical commitment that enabled it. If the field was still seen as tricky programming, like the examples we have from the earlier SAGE project, where code comments were famously written in Latin or Greek because there was no common standard, would they have ever been funded or permitted to create such a rigorous, complex, real-time operating system? The commitment to treating software development as an engineering discipline, which necessitated the coining of the term, that is what gave them the mandate to move past clever shortcuts and demand predictable, ultra-reliable systems. The conceptual shift provided the intellectual permission structure to spend time developing error detection and recovery logic robust enough for life support. The technical success was the outcome of the conceptual mandate.
But this technical outcome received its own massive objective validation, and that's independent of the nomenclature. Let's just look at the economic recognition. In 2003, Hamilton received the NASA Exceptional Space Act Award. This award included $37,200, the largest amount awarded to any individual in NASA's history at that time. And it wasn't given for coining a phrase. It was given specifically for her scientific and technical contributions.
That is an important data point regarding the financial recognition of her technical prowess. It certainly proves the systems themselves were independently valued.
Exactly. NASA was paying for the demonstrable value of the methodologies and the systems. The administrator, Sean O'Keefe, he noted that the concepts she and her team created became the building blocks for modern software engineering. They paid for the building blocks, not just for the name of the house.
I accept that the techniques were the immediate recipient of that award, but let me push back on the idea that her enduring focus was solely technical, using her post-Apollo career as the evidence.
Please do.
So Hamilton spent her subsequent career founding companies, specifically Higher Order Software, or HOS, in 1976, and then Hamilton Technologies in 1986. These companies were created to develop ideas about error prevention and fault tolerance, using methodologies like HOS and the Universal Systems Language, USL. If the name was her primary contribution, we might expect her later focus to be on, academic standardization or curriculum development. Instead, she spent decades refining the technical methodology for systems design, moving toward what she called development before the fact, to keep errors out of the system from the very beginning.
I think you just made my point for me.
How so?
Her enduring intellectual focus was refining the mechanism of reliability. That shows that to her, the methodology, the practical tools, held the greater importance.
I wholeheartedly agree that her later work focused intensely on methodology, but I would argue that methodologies like USL are the most abstract and conceptual form of engineering possible.
See, that's where we fundamentally diverge. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the methodology is merely conceptual in the same way the term software engineering is. The USL framework involves system-oriented objects, formal systems modeling languages, and correctness verification using built-in language properties. This is rigorous applied mathematics and logic embedded in a tool.
And that's precisely the point. USL is about formal specification and mathematical verification of system requirements before you even start coding. It's an intellectual tool designed to ensure absolute, provable correctness. These are the technical building blocks O'Keefe mentioned: domain analysis, maximizing software reliability and reuse, minimizing errors. The label software engineering is secondary to the creation of the tools that actually fulfill the promise of engineering.
But again, you're skipping the critical cultural step. The term software engineering provided the intellectual authority required to elevate software design to this level of rigor. You can't market a complex, formal systems modeling language like USL to a room full of people who still view software development as just a collection of tricky individual hacks.
I see why you think that, but I would frame it differently. The Apollo program, with its unprecedented technical challenges and the critical nature of the hardware, it forced that rigor upon the developers. The constraints of the material-limited memory, real-time necessity, those were the primary drivers of the intellectual sophistication. The name simply crystallized an inevitable professionalization that was already underway, due to necessity and physics.
I disagree. Necessity may be the mother of invention, but legitimacy is the father of standardization. Without the formal terminology, those innovations, the priority display logic, the fault tolerance, they could have remained proprietary tricks used only by the Apollo team, rather than standardized principles transferable to, say, banking software, or air traffic control, or modern operating systems. The term turned a localized genius into a universally applicable field of study.
That's an insightful point about standardization. But the proof of transferability still rests on the robustness of the technical architecture. Look at modern computing. Every operating system, every mission-critical process scheduler, it uses the core concepts pioneered in the AGC: process prioritization, resource arbitration, and controlled shutdown and restart. The code that saved the lunar module is still running, conceptually, in every smartphone and server today. That specific practical technical legacy, the how of reliable computing, that is what defines her greatest impact. So to summarize my position, Margaret Hamilton's decision to name the discipline software engineering was a profound act of intellectual leadership, of cultural foresight. It was the essential prerequisite that legitimized the field, granting it the respect, the budget, and the institutional structure necessary to mandate and develop the powerful technical achievements that followed. Without the term, the high standard of reliability we saw in the AGC might never have been demanded or universally adopted across the industry.
And my position holds that the demonstrated ultra-reliability of the AGC software, which saved the Apollo 11 mission, a definitive event in human history, and the subsequent creation of rigorous formal systems modeling languages like USL and HOS, that holds the greater tangible impact. Her work laid the specific, logical, and physical blueprint for how modern, fault-tolerant software systems must function. The life-saving technical functionality is, for me, the ultimate yardstick of her genius.
Well, it's clear that the source material richly documents Margaret Hamilton as both a conceptual trailblazer and a technical genius. Her story brilliantly reflects the value of rigorous thought both in defining a field and in executing the complex requirements within it.
Indeed, it leaves us to weigh the influence of the necessary concept against the proven, life-saving practice. It shows how naming a thing can grant it status, but only flawless execution can grant it immortality.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.